you can see the existing references in a project in Solution Explorer. That's the purpose of this References node right here. So I can expand that, and you can see that we have references to several of the namespaces, as well as a couple other things, including support for Microsoft C#. And there's the system namespace reference right there. But if I needed to add another reference, I could right-click on References and select Add Reference. And that opens up this Reference Manager dialog box. This dialog box lets you add references to other .NET Framework assemblies, to COM components, and to other projects that are currently loaded in Visual Studio, as well as other assemblies that you might have available, or to other recently referenced assemblies. So you can scroll through this and see that there's the Microsoft.C# namespace. Scroll down, there's System. It's already added to the project. As I mentioned, it's always added to all .NET applications in Visual Studio. And there's System.core and data and so forth. You can also browse for other items that are on disk using the Browse button. I can add COM projects. And then if I had any other projects in this solution, then I could add a reference to those projects as well. But I only have a single project in the current solution, so there aren't any other projects that were found. Okay, so that's how you can add references. Now, given the hierarchical nature of the .NET framework, in which namespaces contain classes that contain objects that contain methods, properties, and so on, you may need some help exploring the hierarchy. The Object Browser provides a tree-based view of various namespaces and classes. Okay, so I'm going to click over here to get rid of that, rid of the Solution Explorer, and then I'll come over here to View, and I'll select Object Browser. And that opens up a new window here within my design environment. The initial view of the window is to display containers, the assembly files referenced by the application. So those should generally look pretty familiar. It's the references that were included in Solution Explorer with the addition of the application itself. But since any part of the class hierarchy can be split across containers, all of a namespace doesn't need to be included in a single assembly. The view, as a result, the view is a little bit misleading. So I can right-click on any item in the left-hand pane and select View Namespaces from the context menu for a better view into the hierarchy, because that will consolidate the namespace into essentially a single entity that we can examine. All right, so I'll go ahead and do that. I'll right-click, View Namespaces, and that changes the window here to list all of the available namespaces. Then what I can do is I can scroll down here, and I want to take a look at System.io. And I'll expand that node. So this is the namespace that handles basically any kind of interaction with the disk file system. So for example, you can see that there's a file object here, and it has a number of methods and other members. And I can expand that node and look at the base types and see that the base type is object, which is the ultimate base type of pretty much all objects within the .NET framework. And then you can see that there's a couple instances of the copy method, and there's a couple of them because they have a different signature. They take different parameters. This one takes 3 parameters, 2 strings and a boolean, and this one takes 2 strings. So you have a couple different options in how you call this particular method. So you can select that, and I'll increase the size there, and you get plenty of documentation about how to use this method, what it does, and so forth. Okay, so the Object Browser is great. In the left-hand side, you get all of the namespaces if you're viewing the namespace view. You can drill down into them to see the different objects, namespaces and objects that are contained within a namespace, and then look at the different properties and methods of the object and get documentation. Okay, so let's close this view, and now I want to start adding a bit of code to this application, so then I can show you a few other things. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I don't need all these additional using statements because I'm not going to use any objects within those namespaces. So I'll get rid of that just to clean up my application a little bit. And then I'm going to add a little bit of code to the main method. First thing I'll do is I will add a couple of comment lines. Okay, and I'll even use proper casing. And then, so those are a couple comments. Because I'm using the comment character, the compiler is going to ignore everything to the right of those 2 forward slashes. And because that's the only thing that's on that line, those are comment lines. So that's not going to affect the end result of the compilation. And then I'm going to type in the object that I need, console, and see that I get IntelliSense. And so I can just, because it selected the correct object, it's the first one alphabetically that matches the letters that I've typed so far, I'll just hit the Tab key, and then I'll go ahead and hit the semicolon. So now I have a partial statement. It's not a complete statement yet. Okay, so I've started writing code, but I'm not there yet, and this won't compile. Red squigglies are never a good thing. Okay, so a few things about the code so far. The using statement that I have up above, using system, right here, means that I don't have to write system.console. So this is just a keystroke saving measure. It doesn't affect the code or how the code is compiled whatsoever. Oh, I forgot to change the class name. Okay, so there's my Hello World class. Is the container for all of the code here, including this main method. Now the container is delimited by these curly brackets. So this is the common delimiter for code blocks within C#. So it means that everything within the open and closing bracket there is going to be the code that defines the Hello World class. Just like the open and closing brackets here define all of the code that make up the main method. And as you can see, as I move the mouse around, I get various tooltips with information about these different objects. The signature there, and console, because it has a red squiggly, it gives me information that the console is a type which is not valid in a given context. I haven't completed that statement yet, intentionally. And so I can get information about what problems are as I just move the mouse around the application. So I've added comments to explain what code does, and misspelled something there, so I fix that. But another purpose for comments is that I can comment out code. So let's say that I'm writing some big, hairy method. I'm at a stopping point here. I need to figure out what I need to do next, and I have this partial statement written. Well, I can tell the compiler to ignore that by commenting it out. So now the compiler is going to treat that as a comment and is not going to try to compile that partial statement. All right, and Visual Studio also has a real easy way of adding and removing comments. So I selected that line, and I can select multiple lines as well. And I can remove the comment using that button right there. And I can put it back doing that. That's real handy for commenting out an entire section of code. It'll add those comment characters to all of the lines that they have available. Okay, and so in fact to demonstrate that, I can select all these rows, all those lines, and remove the comments. And now I pretty much have a mess because this is just not C# code whatsoever. So if I want to restore that, in this case I could hit Control-Z, but I could also select those comment lines and comment them back out. And that's not quite the style that I like, so I'm going to add spaces when I type in comments. But that's a quick view into how you can use comments. Okay, so let's get back to this incomplete statement now. So the reason I left it incomplete is that I wanted to investigate an important feature of the Microsoft development software, which is called IntelliSense. IntelliSense makes it easier for you to write code by letting you select from a list of possible options as you type. So it provides help with namespace, class, method, and property names, as well as information about parameters for methods. So the way IntelliSense works is by accessing metadata, both in the .NET Framework assemblies and in your custom assemblies, the code that you're writing. As you begin typing a namespace, class, method, or property, IntelliSense suggests completions. And then you can either accept the suggestion by pressing Enter, or continue typing the name, or press the Tab key. Eventually, IntelliSense will determine exactly which name you want, given enough information. And then it can also display a short description in the pop-up window. All right, so let's finish writing this code. I'm just going to add a space there just to make it a little bit easier. And I'll hit the dot, which is a separator between objects and namespaces, as well as namespaces in a hierarchy. And there's the IntelliSense in action. So as you can see, it pops up a list of potential items. These are going to be methods and other members of the console object. And then you can see that the first one is selected, and I get this brief bit of information about the signature for that method, as well as what it does. And then I can start typing. I want the WriteLine method, so I'll hit a W. I'm not quite where I want. I'll hit R. Okay, now I'm better. I have only two choices, and so I'll hit the down arrow key, and then I can hit the Tab key to accept that option. I also could have pressed Enter in that case. All right, so that's a real handy way of getting information, exploring different objects, and in fact, even if you know an object well, remembering what items are available. Because I can scroll through that list and see, and oh gosh, I'm looking for a XYZ method, whatever it might be, and maybe it's not there, so I've misremembered what that object does. Okay, and then the next thing that happens is I'll type the opening parentheses, and WriteLine is what's called an overloaded method. There's 19 different versions of the WriteLine method that take different parameters. Okay, so in this case, I can hit the down arrow and a Boolean. No, I don't want a Boolean because I want to display a string. No, char is just a single character. That's an array of chars, which is a buffer, but that's not quite what I want. Decimal value? No. Double, float, int value, longs, object, string. The 11th option here is the one that I actually wanted. Because what I want to display is a string. So I'll go ahead and start typing that in. Hello world. And then I'll put in the closing parentheses. Okay? And often C#, or the actual Visual Studio, will include the closing parentheses for you. I kind of typed this in a little funky, so it didn't do that. But anyway, so that makes it really easy to figure out which overload you need. Very often with more sophisticated methods, there may be not a version of the overload that works, because maybe I only want to pass a string, but there isn't an overload that takes just a single string. Maybe the closest I can get is a single string and a Boolean. Well, that probably means that I need to refresh myself on what that particular method does, because I forgot that I needed a Boolean. But I'll get IntelliSense telling me what the Boolean is indicating, and maybe that's an obvious value. Maybe just, oh, okay, for this thing I just need to set it to false. Whatever works. But in this case, WriteLine has an overload version that takes just a string, and so I'm good. So I'll clean up that extra space, and now I've made that a complete statement. The red squiggly line is gone, and so I'm good. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more code to flesh out this method. I'll add another comment. And for that, I'm going to use the console object again. I'm going to write out something again. Notice that because I last used the WriteLine method, when I typed a W, it didn't go to the first W in the list like it did the first time. It went straight to the last one that I used, the thinking being that if I used WriteLine once, there's a pretty good chance that I'm going to need to use it again immediately. Okay? But otherwise, I can move around that list. I can continue to type this. If I, in fact, wanted window height, I could just type an I, and it'll go to window height. Okay. In this case, I'll just hit Tab, and I'm going to put in a little prompt. Notice that because I typed everything normally, I got the closing double quotes. I hit a single double quote. It put in the closing double quote as well as the closing parentheses this time. So I'll say any key to continue. And then I need to put in the closing semicolon. All right, so that gives a prompt to the user after greeting them with hello world. And now I need to wait for a key press. So I'm going to use the console object again. And this time, oh, I typed in the wrong letter, so I just hit the down arrow to select console. and it selected and corrected my misspelling there. And this time I'm going to use read key. Hit down, and I don't need any parameters for that, and put in the closing semicolon. All right, so that's the entire code for my very simple application.